Alright, so continuing where we left off from the last tutorial, the next thing we really want to do is we want to make a game loop. So you could try to see if you can figure out how to make a game loop, but and you can try finding some example code on the web for it. But this one's a little bit more difficult. It is in the documentation, but the direct reference and explanation to how it works is not quite readily apparent. So there are, as Flash is an animation tool, it has frames, and it runs at a specific frame rate. You can specify the frame rate you want your animation to run at, and it'll try its utmost to keep up. What this also means is that you can trap the designated frame rate. Based off that frame rate, you can cause things to happen. Now there are two ways to do it. One's the frame, enter frame, and this is pretty good because it's basically before rendering. And how you use event listeners, and this is kind of goes into events. There's so many different types of events you can kind of trap. This one I'm going to kind of show you. But the event structure is like this. You call the function add event listener. An add event listener looks kind of like this. It takes in the type of event, a listener function, and a whole bunch of other things. But these two are the most important. The type and the listener function. Now if we go back, we take a look at the enter frame. And you click on it, you can see that it is flash events dot event enter frame. And this is exactly what it is right here. Here's the enter frame. I clicked on the link and it shows us that an enter frame is actually just a string called enter frame, which means I could theoretically just say add event listener enter frame exactly as it's spelled. If I misspell it or even change the case, it's not going to work. And a function we want it to trigger. And I'm gonna call a function on update, which also means I'm designating this function. I have to provide a function with that exact name on update, and it takes in all events take in at least one parameter. It depends on how the function is constructed. But what will happen is if you just make an empty function like this, it'll blow up. It'll say it'll try running it and it'll never kind of work. Every event takes in at least one parameter, and it's of that type of event you're dispatching. So I'll show you this in a bit. But I'm going to say event dot also means I have to import it. So import flash dot events dot event, and this is an event dot enter frame. Now if I were to just say trace hello kitty to see if whether or not it would work, we can totally test that. So, and what do we expect besides for this thing to blow up? Oh right, I forgot to add the event. So it always takes in a type of type event. Perfect. And it's always the type. It's usually the type that kind of has the object. So if event has the constant enter frame, then event is the object you're kind of getting. That's the way they constructed it. It can be different, and when you make your own, it may not work the same way, but if you make your own. But depending. The events are very, very useful for stuff, and hopefully we'll see it in the future. So if I run this, what do we expect? This Hello Kitty should trace tons and tons. Like every frame, a new one should be coming out of the screen. And there it is, enter frame. Now, to show you that it could even work with a string, because all it does is it's taking a string. Same thing happens. So the question is, why do we use this isn't the string is not the recommended method. And why is that? Think about it. And the answer should become super clear to you. It's because it's a magic number, and magic numbers are things that are hard-coded. This over here is a magic number. This over here, these are all magic numbers, things that cannot change. They're not malleable, they're not dynamic, and what that means is if we have to change something about it, or something about it does change, we have to go and find where it's referenced, and everywhere it's referenced, and change all those references. So, for instance, if I wanted to call this event, if I actually use the string and Adobe decides, okay, that's a bad string to use, let's change it to something else. If I were to run my code, all my events would stop firing. Why? Because I called it enter frame and they called it on update or something else. That being the case, having these, this is what it's called a constant, and if you take a look at the construction, I wish I could show it to you, but this is how it's declared: public static constant enter frame. And if you wanted to create your own, you could definitely do the same thing. Constants is a new type I haven't shown you yet. Static is also something else, and we'll see a little bit more of them later, but this is the type of variable, and it's a very powerful way to reference your variables, and it works under very, in specific circumstances. Now this is a good one. The next thing I want you to try and do is, well, this is going to be the first thing, because I didn't think you understood the construction of events and the way that Flash kind of works, and there probably is documentation somewhere, but it's not right on the page, so I did want to show you this one. The next one I want you to try is try doing events for key presses or the mouse move. And see if you can get those working. Mouse move first, key presses after. Okay, now once you've given that a try, I'll show you. I'm going to show you exactly what to kind of do. And I'm going to show you right now. The two events we need for key presses are, first start with mouse. Mouse move is the one for mouse. The one for keys is key up and key down, but this is very special. And I don't know if it's going to particularly tell us about how they kind of work, but anyway, if you click on these, they'll kind of tell you what kind of properties they have. There's also an example of capturing keyboard input. This is actually very important because keyboard input isn't the easiest thing to capture. And the reason for this is because the object that has focus captures the keyboard input. And the reason for this is because if every object would dispatch key presses and the like, then your game would lag every time you hit like the U. So you don't want to you don't want every object to dispatch it, so they just give you kind of focus. We'll start with the mouse one because it's a little bit simpler. I'm going to copy our code, and it's no longer just an event. It's going to be a mouse event. And it's going to be on mouse move. Great. On mouse move. And what are we going to do on mouse move? Well, I'll tell you what. Let's set we could just do a trace, but I don't want to do that. What I want you to do is, because I've already done a trace for the enter frame, I want you to make the sprite that we generated and drew our circle on to move. I want it to move to wherever our mouse location is. Give that a try. Now if you're done giving that a try, you can listen up. what you'd have to do is, because here's another indication of how functions kind of work. Anything that's declared here, this is also a var declaration, similar to these. But this var declaration ends as soon as the function ends, right here. That means it no longer exists, and there's no way to access it. Now, if there's no way to access it, that means our function, or our declaration of it over there, is probably the wrong place to put it. We want it to be accessed globally, i.e. in this other on-mouse down function. So to make it accessed globally, we have to make the declaration up here. So I'm just going to call sprite. It's going to be equal to, and I don't even have to do anything else. I'm just going to keep the equals in, take out the var declaration, because I'm declaring it up there and declaring it down here. It'll all kind of work. So now when I declare it, I've still got a reference to it. And then down here, when it moves, when the mouse moves, we can say x is equal to e dot movement Sorry. We could theoretically do the movement. This is actually a new property I haven't seen yet, which is kind of cool. Probably tells us, if we go to the documentation, it'll probably tell us what it does. I'll click on it, see if it gives us some information. But it says the change in horizontal coordinates of the mouse position since the last mouse event, if mouse locking is enabled. That's super cool. And this is like, you know, if you have a problem with the mouse leaving your screen and you want to trap it, then these are the ones you want to use. Now, in our case, because we're not actually going to lock our mouse, which is fair. I mean, I'd feel pretty upset if our mouse was locked. We're actually just going to say we're just going to use the local x, the horizontal coordinates, and the local y. Right, so this is if mouse locking is disabled, and we haven't enabled it, so it's disabled by default, I'm assuming. You could also try it and see which one kind of works. If it works, then it's enabled or disabled. Or you could just Google mouse locking and find out whether or not how to enable or disable it. Fair enough. Both types of work, but theoretically, these two lines of code should move our player to wherever our mouse is. So as we move my mouse, and my screen capture software is kind of messing up with it. Here's the other thing is I'm listening for mouse events, but the only thing that kind of dispatches those events is the object on my stage. So to really make this work, maybe a little better, you could do one of two things. I hope. We'll see. See if adding it to the stage. So adding it to the stage is not quite adding it to the objects below it. Now, if you'll notice, I don't know if you notice it, but every so often the mouse kind of glitches, and that's because the local x actually changes. Because if I'm when I'm mousing over the stage over here, this region, white region, I'm setting off all these events. But when my mouse mouse is over another object, my local x is different. It's local to that object. So if I actually am faster than the circle, I can actually change its local x and get it to kind of like respawn up the top. To fix that, it's actually, you can do something for it. It's enable, or I think it's called mouse children. And you can set it to false. So none of the, I think there was an error somewhere, migration issue. Right. It's because I'm probably using this issue. You can kind of ignore it, but this one says it's just a notifying that I'm using an on-mouse move function. Now this is old, reminiscent of AS2, and AS2 used to have an on-mouse move function, but you wouldn't declare event listeners like you do now. This way is cheaper and a lot more dynamic, but because you didn't declare event listeners in the way that you do currently, it just kind of worked. What I want to tell you is, like, you know, if you're using AS3, by the way, make sure you're declaring the event first, because whatever you're looking at isn't going to work. So mouse children and mouse. So this is actually the most important one. Um, mouse mouse enabled. There we go. Is false. So if I had things, this one isn't going to be useful. Sorry, I added this one by mistake. It's a little prematurely. But if you want to know what it does, if we go to where are you? It's a property. So mouse enabled. It's a Boolean property. Which specifies whether this object receives the mouse or other user input messages. And so if I set this to false, that means I can no longer mouse over that. Alright, so I can move it as fast as I want, and it's never going to snap to the top. Anyway. Right, because it's not triggering that, it's not dispatching those events, only the stage is now. That's number one. Now number two, similar to how I was telling you before, so let's just comment these out a little bit. Give the keyboard a try. And I'm going to tell you right now, you're going to have to add it to the stage as well. Not the add event listener to the main movie clip. I can tell you why, and I'll tell you why, but give it a try. See if you can get it working, and if you can, good job. I will now go into the explanation, so you can listen up. Stage.add event listener. Now, which event are we adding? We're adding a keyboard event.key down, and all we want to do is on key down. All we want to do is we want to trigger an event. And what are we going to do? I've commented out my circle. So the best thing is going to be to actually move our circle. Public function, exactly as we've seen it before, on key down. And sometimes it'll actually import for you. In this case, it did. Usually it doesn't. Not in this version of, not in Flash. The Flash IDE, that is. Not the best for this perfect programming. And hopefully next time I will show you another environment which will make programming quite a bit more easier. So on key down, right? And so how are we going to make this move? This is the function you have to kind of call. You can try getting the object to move on your own. If you do, good job. If you don't, I will show you how you can kind of get it working. If we take a look at our keyboard. See if I can just find a key down. Key down. Somebody take a look for it. There it is. Key down. Come on. Perfect. So we take a look at all this information. Now, bubbling and other things are interesting concepts. You can kind of figure out like how they kind of work, but right now it's not really that important. What we really want to do is we want to say, okay, how do we get which key was pressed? Now there are two possible ways, and there's a bunch of actual ways because we've got a whole bunch more properties here. We've got a char code, the character code value for the key that was pressed or released. We have the key code, the code value of the key that was pressed or released. The key location, location of the key on the keyboard. Each one of these can work in very different specific cases. Now, I've never used key location or char code. Not that you can't. Control key could be useful if you want to know whether or not the control key is currently down while they're pressing these keys. Also, I think they might have one for this is command. They might have one for shift. Yeah, they have one for shift. So you can trap whether or not that changes. The one I like using is key code. Now, if we go to this tutorial on capturing keyboard input, it'll probably give us a brief rundown of how that kind of works. This is key codes and character codes. It's probably going to be pretty important. This will give you a really basic understanding of how these things kind of work. But let's click on see what. So they tell us over here where the key codes and character codes found. Well, it's in the flash.ui.keyboard. So we click on that. That class will kind of take us to where everything's kind of defined. Now this is also important, right? I kind of told you before, reference documentation is super important. So if you're not using the reference documentation, definitely use it. But also it's sort of like a book. You choose your own adventure. You kind of start in one place. You have no idea how it kind of works, and you keep on clicking to browse for more information, exploring. It's sort of exploratory. It's like a game in and of itself. Um, so if you don't find the answer right away and it doesn't seem to be readily visible, sometimes you have to click on a couple links, maybe look at an example, just to get an idea of how maybe it's supposed to function, but it doesn't really matter. Audio, constant keep setting the audio mode. This one's kind of cool. I didn't know there was one like this. Well, you learn something new every day. Charcode string. It's an array containing all the defined key name constants. This is also kind of cool. Anyway, you could go through this list, and there's like tons and tons and tons of them. And I don't know, they keep on adding a few more every so often, as often as they kind of map them themselves and they tie it into different things. This is a yellow function key button. Toggling subtitles. I didn't know there was a function for toggling subtitles. String user. User constant. Didn't know that was one. Yeesh, there's a lot of weird ones too. Anyway, you keep on learning like new ones, and this could actually be super useful depending on like what you're doing. You know, and I sometimes wonder like why they've implemented it. It might be something like, you know, YouTube requested, hey, you know, give us the information. Drop some of these keys. We want to know what they're doing. So if they press the, you know, skip forward or go by, you know, forward a little bit, they can actually take that into account and do it on YouTube. I think, you know, YouTube does trap a couple of your keys, and based off of what it is, you know, allows you to skip forward and back accordingly. But so if we want to make our character move, I'm actually going to use WASDA. All the keys are kind of here and they're all statics, but what that means to us is we can access them. And so if these are the key codes, if these are the you know, key code values, then we can say if this is our first condition. I hope you're a little bit introduced to some of this stuff a little bit before, because if this was your first introduction, it might be a little confusing, but definitely, right? If E is our condition, what do we want to test? If our char code, or key code, is equal to keyboard. Now, it's not going to give me a list because I haven't imported it. The rule for imports is usually if you put a new in front of it, or you do a couple of certain things, it'll pop up and auto-import it for you. Usually not, though. So keyboard dot. So here's our entire list. I'm gonna say W. What's VOD? Unbelievable. I keep on learning new things. So you can even make it arrow keys if you want. Give it a try if you want. So this is our condition, and if we hit the W key, we should move up. Give it a try. If this is your first time writing an if statement, put something in there, make something move. If it isn't, you can just kind of, and you got it working, good job. If you didn't, then I'll kind of show you how it works. Circle, gotta spell these right. Dot X minus minus. Now, if we take a look at our stage, ooh, get out of here. If we take a look at our stage, and this is 0, 0, and this is 800 by 600. Is it 800 by 600? It's 550 by 400, but I'm gonna make this 800 by 600 just because it's a nicer standard to kind of follow. Sort of the max size we can kind of employ to get it on a portal anyway. And set our frame rate to 30. 30 is a pretty good frame rate to set it to. And so if it's 800 by 600, this is 0, 0. What is this? 800 by 600. So if we wanted to move up, if we're at 800 by 600 and we want to move up, we want to get to 0, we have to go in the minus direction. So minus, minus, and minus, minus for the X as well. So W is up in the minus, minus direction. But this is also supposed to be in the Y, not the X. So if we save this, and I hold W, you can see it moving. Now you'll also notice something fairly strange. I'm actually going to put this down a little bit. So you can see it just a little bit better. But watch the circle very closely. Actually, I'm going to also make our increments. So minus minus is one of the operators. If you haven't gone through the list, go through the list of operators. Show you what you can kind of do. Operators down here. But minus minus is one, or minus equals is another. And I'm actually going to make it by a larger amount, like 10 or something, so you can really see it. Now you see that. When I start, there's kind of a delay. Now why is that? Think about it. Get all the other keys working. And I'll kind of show you where this delay comes from. Now, what happens when you press a key down is the environment traps all the keys sent by the keyboard. Now this is also trapped by, it's first trapped by the operating system to, you know, indicate how frequently these keys should be, the refire delay on it. And it's based off the refire, so when I'm holding W and W is working, it's based off the refire. So what that means is, if I was to go something like this, you know, let's do D. Why don't we do S? S and D. So I'm gonna switch these around so these are all positive, because I'm gonna run out of room fairly quick. I'm going on the Y. So S and D, down and across. Perfect. Right, and I kind of started with this a little bit, but on key up is the next function we're gonna kind of play with to get it working a little bit better. You can give it a try first if you wanna visualize how you kind of want to get this working, but it kind of works in conjunction with the update listener. That's the logic behind it anyway. So key doesn't do this, but on key down, on key up. Perfect. So if I hold this down, there's a refire delay, right? And this is D. I'm holding down D, holding down S. Great. Now if I try holding them down together, here's D, now S. You see how D stopped? You'd think it'd move in a diagonal, but it's not. And the reason why is because if you even open up something like Notepad, and you hit D, and then S, it kills it off. So the operating system is no longer firing D. And that's what gets sent across. And that's very important. Flash doesn't do anything fancy. It's just taking what the operating system gives it, which means we have to implement our own methods to kind of get this to work so it's fluid. Now, if we want it to move anyway, it's a little bit, you know, haltingly. It's definitely not 30 frames per second. So if we want it to move fluidly, what can we theoretically do? Now, give it a try and see if you can come up with something that you could theoretically do to get these keys to be a little bit more fluid. If you can't, the trick is it's going to be with an on key up, probably going to use the same if conditions, but it's also going to be using an event listener. Now the event listener is actually going to, so give it a try. If you can't, If you can, good job. I'll go into the detailed explanation now. The event listener is actually going to act as the thing that modifies your location. So it's going to say, which means I'm going to trap two new variables, private var left, oh sorry, that's right is right pressed. All variables should theoretically be camel cased in Flash, which means first letter is lowercase and every first letter of subsequent words is uppercase. Also make them sort of, you know, logical. They sort of convey what they're doing. It's not something dynamic. Circle's a bad name. My vector list is a bad name. These should be booleans. So is right key pressed? That's false. And is down key pressed? That's false. And I'm not really going to kind of get into that right now, but way things are going, we'll just show you quickly how that kind of gets working. On key down. Perfect. So if we're using these same conditions, key right is key right. Is equal to true is key down is equal to true. And we're going to duplicate this. So that's when the key's pressed, so it's true. When the key's released, or up, which is our release state, that is a false. Perfect. Now in our update loop, we say if right key is pressed, then circle x plus equals, let's make it 10. I break something? Oh, it's key down. I probably spelled this wrong. Is down pressed. Oops. This is why I kind of like copy my variables. And I like the code hinting, but it didn't hit me this time, so it's kind of a bummer. So boom. And why does down make him move on the X? I'll never know. But you'll notice a couple of things. Firstly, there's no halt. And the other thing, he's probably moving much faster. Oh. Oops. Right. Right, okay. If you're following along and you're correcting these mistakes as I go, good on you. I did make a mistake. Big mistake is these need to be toggled. Very good. Right, S is on our keyboard is supposed to be down, not the other way around. It's kind of weird. Yeah, that was a bad. My bad, sorry. Very good, so it's fluid. We're also getting a Hello Kitty, so that's happening every frame. And it's fluid, and as long as the key is pressed, it moves at 10 frames per second fluidly across, and it feels fluid. It doesn't feel like it's haltingly. If I were to lower down my keyboard refire delay, so that's even slower, then it would be even worse. So it's better not to tie the event to the key. It's better just to tie it to some sort of, when the state changes, you tie it to that change of state and do that. So that was one. Number two, next thing I hope to kind of cover today and this is probably the last thing. Also, it's going to be collision detection. Now, if I open up the reference and see if you can find collision. I'm going to go back. We're an interactive object now, but it should be somewhere here. It's not in the events. It'll probably be, it's going to be one of the methods, not properties. See if you can find some way to detect whether or not two objects collide. Go for it now, and I will go into the detailed explanation in a little bit. The other thing to note is that at event.enterFrame is only one of the events you can kind of do on a game loop. This one's tied to the graphics rendering. So when things are rendering and things kind of change, you can kind of see it and it looks a lot more fluid. The drawbacks of using an interframe is that if the game starts to lag because your logic is too heavy, everything will kind of get slow and just chug and it won't look fluid. Now if you want to get around that, you could use a timer. Now a timer will, you can get it to refire at a very specific interval, and it could happen over and over and over again endlessly, and even if the graphics don't update and you have lots of complex rendering happening, the logic can still update without slowing your game down. I'm not going to go into too much. Usually my goal is to not let the game lag, and that should be your goal too. If the game's lagging, then try to fix it some other ways. There are different ways that game engines like Unity, they actually give you a delta time. Some game engines will give you a delta time, show you the change in time. So like if it is lagging, you can kind of just use the delta time to figure out how far your object should kind of be. But that is not the most recommended, and nor is it the easiest thing to kind of implement. So I generally stay away from them, but it's not too bad. So for the collision detection, now here's the thing. For collision detection, if we go to, wrong browser. If we go to go down the list and we take a look at all of these, the one that should come to mind that for collision detection is either hit test object or hit test point. Now hit test point, if you did get it working with hit test point, good on you, kudos. You could probably tie it to the mouse and see whether or not your mouse is colliding with the object. And maybe I'll show you that right now. So if I were to say if so let's just test it on the circle. So circle dot, and because it's tied to a game object and the circle is a sprite, it's actually tied to a display object, and sprite is a display object. You can kind of see it down in the inheritance list, right? Movie clip sprite, display object container, interactive object, display object. So it extends all these all the way back to object, and so it is a form of object. It'll also have that kind of list, and so we can say circle dot hit test point. What are the points? We're going to say are mouse X and mouse Y. And use the shape flag is true. Now if I turning this on, you can toggle play around with it on or off. And I'm actually just going to trace colliding show us that we are colliding. Our collision kind of working. Mouse X. And you can kind of format these trace statements in this way, you know, as strings, because that's kind of what it prints out anyway. So why not? Mouse Y, and you play around with it both ways. I think did I break it? No, I didn't break it. So as I mouse over, boom, it tells us, okay, colliding, 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 stop. Colliding, 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 stop. Stop. Right, and as you go around the corner, you can trace around the circle, and there's no collision. Now, if you don't turn shape flag to true, what it's going to do is it's going to treat the entire render area, this object. I can't show it to you, but let me show you. If I were to create a new symbol, and I'm going to call it like my circle, just as an example. Circle. And I were to draw a circle in there. Now it doesn't really matter what the size of the circle is. If I drag it on the screen, see that little blue box around it? That's a bounding box. Anything you draw in Flash, be it dynamic or static through classes or otherwise, is always going to have a bounding box associated to it that kind of just tells it how it has to re-render. It's cheaper to do. So if I were to set this to false, it's actually going to use that bounding box to, like, as soon as I hit this corner, I'm not even touching it, and it's already starting to trace. So usually if you're going to use hit test point, you're going to use the more expensive method, which is actually test the shape to make sure it's working. This works on a very particular subset of cases, i.e. like your terrain is very dynamic and it's fluid and you want it to kind of feel like he's walking up and down. Doesn't really come across too well in platformer games. It's harder to pull off and make look good, but that's one possible method. And good on you if you got it working. Now the other method actually requires us to make another object. So why don't we just have, we're going to create a box. So one will be a circle, one will be a box, private var square sprite. If only I could spell these right. I'm used to autocomplete, so I don't usually type these all in. So I keep on even having tons and tons of fun with this thing. But yeah, let's just duplicate this over. So square is going to be everything else that circle is, except it's going to try making a square. Do it. Do it. I will show you how to do it right now if you haven't been able to. But definitely pause this video and try making a square yourself. So begin fill. So we're going to use a different color. I actually don't want to use yellow. I want to use red. Why not? It's a cool color. The last thing we are going to do is we're also going to call draw rect. Now draw rect will allow us to draw, and it tells you the kind of parameters you can kind of throw in there. An x, y, width, height. Takes in all those parameters. So I'm actually just going to say draw at 0, 0, 40 by 40. So that's really just a square. And add it to the stage so we can actually see it. Now, where do I want to add it? I kind of want to add it into the middle of our stage, so you can try getting it in the middle there. Pause it, take a look at the properties, try getting it in the middle. And if you couldn't find it, it's actually tied to, we want it in the middle of the world. Where do we find our world? Our world is our stage. Stage is our display object. Click on that. There are, well, they kind of show you how this is the local example of our stage. What do they use? They use stage.stage width, and this example actually tells us what the, if we want something to be centered, this just kind of works. And you can kind of copy this code and paste it, and it'll probably work as long as you get the import line. But if we actually click on our stage, yes, that property kind of gave it away. There is a stage, let's just find it, stage width and a stage height property, pixel of the width and height of the stage in whatever. And so if I want it to be relatively in the middle, you can just say square x is going to be equal to stage dot stage, come on, width. Give me the hinting. Now, if you want it to be halfway in the middle, you times it by 0.5. Now, this isn't exactly 100% right. If you wanna, you should really try to get it perfect. You see how this point's in the middle, but the rest of it's kind of offset. So what you should kind of do is see if you can get it perfectly in the middle. Now, if you did, good on you. If you didn't, I'm going to show you quickly how to do that. You can dynamically make it perfectly in the middle by saying squared dot width times 0.5, so half is width to offset it back to compensate for that. And if we run it, it's perfectly in the center. Good on you if you figure that out. A little bit of math. Math is kind of important. It's more logic than anything else, but logic is super important. There we go. Same thing for height. And if we run that, it's perfectly in the center. So now what we got to do, our goal should be, is instead of using hit test point, I mean, we could kind of use that also if we wanted to. And I'm just going to rename this so we can do both, hit test point. And if circle, so let's say it's not circle, let's say it's a so how does sorry, hit test object is the other one we want to try. So that was stage, play object, go back a little bit, movie clip, let's go up a little bit, and we could say hit test object. So this is the one that evaluates whether or not the bounding boxes overlap. This is cheaper, and it's also a little bit simpler to implement, right? You don't have to test a point, you can actually test whether or not two objects collide. And they give you a pretty good example of how this works. And even like, you know, if you found this, this will probably tell you exactly what you need to do to get it working. Good on you. But we've got ours a little bit more dynamic, so I'll show you it anyway. Circle dot hit test object. Square. And if it does work, let's just trace the location of our object. So this is going to be circle.x and circle.y. Well, it's probably not as precise as the... I didn't get down working, so if you didn't get it working like me, you should get it working. Because it's going to be pretty important to move down if it's in the center of our screen. So down. Very good. Now these are all very important things. Movement and collision. Stop colliding, obviously. That's how it worked. Started tracing. Those are some of the most important things. Accessing variables we haven't yet done. I've shown you a way to kind of do it straight from code. So if you weren't even using Flash, Flash IDE, you're using Flash Develop right now, this would work for you. But that's also ignoring the power of Flash. So let's say if I had an object on the stage and I want this to be my circle, not the Not the yellow one I'm making. Let's make it black. I'm going to call this, so how do we access this thing? Accessing information on the screen. So we can do it one of two ways. One is through an instance name. So if I give this a name, call it circle. And probably circle, I'm going to call it circle MC. And what this actually does, I don't like using it because it's a very ugly method and people get confused about this. This is what they think Flash is. Oh, instance names and methods. Chances are you're going to get super confused about it. But what it does is, if I give something an instance name, it does this in the code where I cannot see it. It says public var circle underscore MC, exactly as I spelt it. Probably type it to movie clip. And so when I access it, it won't give me any code hinting. It may let you know it's broken, didn't find it, but it's invisible. You have no idea, and none of the code hinting will kind of tell you where it is or what it is. This is why I never really like to use it. So why am I showing it to you now? Well, it does have its uses. It's really good for things like HUD. Elements you want to place, you want to move around, different things you have in a level. Well, definitely not different things in the level. There are better ways to do it. You could use this method. I definitely do not recommend you using this method. And you can do everything you want with it. So I'm actually going to turn it off a little bit. Actually, I'll show you something cool. If I make this my circle straight up, and I can't leave this in here either. It'll blow up. But this is what it's doing, invisible to us. So if I set my circle, which is a sprite, to be equal to the circle, MC, which is declared on our stage, it should also draw on top of it. Boom, there we go. We get two circles, one on top of the other. Now, the circle we had in there is kind of like on the top. The black is on the top, the blue is, so you can actually use these two in conjunction. So if I move them, they kind of like all move together. It's all tied together now. Now, I could just comment this off because it's a little weird, a little freaky. It's already added to the stage, so I don't have to worry about that. That line was unnecessary, so if I take these back on, still, it's added exactly where we left it. And it's not it's not exactly where we left it. And why not? See if you can figure that one out. It's because we've got the X and Y. That's pretty good. Run it again. It starts off. It's also a pretty good thing, right? It's exactly where we left it. Mouse over it, and we're using that hit test point, so we can kind of get in there a little bit too if I made this thing super large. So it's like, let's make this like 80. Let's make it 80 by 80 by 80. So super large. You can actually get your mouse in there between that, and only when it's like touching that little nook does it do the collision. That's perfect, right? Get it over there, but really complex shape at this point. So I comment these out. We don't really want it. And the hit test object works the same way. And as we move, it's just a circle. We define it any way we want. Okay, that doesn't work. Our game doesn't work. So let's move it up a little bit. And you do the same thing for the square if you really wanted, but that's not the best way to do it. So I don't really want to push that. It works really well for certain things, maybe animations, or you want to lock something to the stage, and it's easier to define it like this. Then great, go for it. Like maybe you have a secondary collision box that you don't want to be tied to the player. That could work out for you. And you want to be able to have it, define it on the stage. And the reason why defining things on the stage is, it's easier. You can see it, physically see what's going on, and you can, get in there quickly and move it around. Oops, should have just moved straight across. So that's one way to do something. The other way is if I wanted to call this thing in code, so I don't have it on the stage or delete it off the stage, and I want to call this thing in code, you can just give it a linkage name, and you can call it, it's now a circle class. And this is going to be super powerful. We're going to use this a lot. Classes. Makes it dynamic. Now, what this actually does is if you take a look, I'm going to actually kill my linkage one more time. You can double click here and give it a linkage name, or you can go to properties, and this gives us everything about it. This name is the name in the library. It doesn't actually mean it's a class. Export for ActionScript, we can actually export it as something we can define and execute in code. And this is class. The class is probably the last thing we're going to go in today. But define it as a circle. Give it a base class if you wanted to. export for ActionScript, so we can actually call it created through code. There are kind of like hacks you could theoretically utilize to create it in code, but you know, it's better not to be hacky. So if I wanted to use it now, we're still gonna have to have the you basically all you gotta do is you gotta say, well, I gave it a class called circle, new circle, and that should work. But we won't see anything because we also have to add this one to the stage. We don't have it physically there, and there it is, 0, 0. Exactly as we had it, and that means we can have complex objects defined, give them animations, given a specific way to look, and given some sort of class declaration. Now, what does this actually do? I don't know if it's actually warning me, but if you hit OK to this, it'll say, oh, you know, no class was found. It'll generate one for you. And what it's actually generating is we don't actually have a circle class. What is it pulling it from? And the answer is this. This class, it's called script1. It's got this little asterisk over here. It means it's not saved. That's because it's not a file. It's not a file part of our project. But what is happening is this file is created. There's no code in it, but it is created for this circle at runtime. So I control enter. It sees, oh, we don't have one. It wants to use the base default stuff. So it'll create one for you. So it allows you to use stuff without having to clutter up all your, you know, files with empty bits like this. It's a little bit confusing because you're going to start wondering, oh, well, where are all these things? And generally, you are going to have a script file, but in certain cases, it works out better that you don't. But that is part one. You can try generating, and you can even do things like this now. Put it on an enter frame, right? Now you've got it working. Just put this thing on an enter frame. See if you can get it to generate, you know, new circles every frame in random locations. Now, if you could, good job. So definitely try it. If you didn't and you still want the solution or you couldn't figure it out, I'll kind of show it to you. Here it is right here. Same thing. So we're going to declare a new variable. We can call it var random circle. Now this is pretty important. Type. It could be a type movie circle. Now the reason why there's no reason we could make a type circle, like literally from the class that we created. You don't generally have to do that, and the general reason, you know, making it more strict means that it wouldn't be able to accept any other object. You know, it wouldn't work with a movie clip. But if I made it a movie clip, it would work with a circle because circle kind of extends movie clip. The reason why I wouldn't generally do it is because also, like, we don't have a script file for it. So, like, it's not going to do anything weird. It's going to work the same way. It's just, you know, I don't know why I'm referencing circle. But anyway, it makes more sense, so I'll do it this way. It also won't give us any code hinting, which is kind of a bummer because it doesn't know what a circle type is. Flash only sees whether or not these things work at compile time, but it doesn't know that, hey, circle is a class, right? So if I hit the dot, it's not giving me like X and Y properties. So generally, that's kind of one reason to stay away from it if you don't have it as a class. But it will work anyway, and I'll just show it to you. We definitely don't want it in like the 0, 0 position, so we've got to find out its location, you know, and give it an X and a Y. And we can use it based off of the stage, so make it based off the stage, because we've got our stage locations, so we can say random circle.x is equal to stage width times multiply that by so math.random will give us a random value. Now if you haven't taken a look at any of the math functions, this is also, you know, same. JavaScript is actually kind of modeled, or Flash is kind of modeled the same way as JavaScript, so a lot of the functions carry across. Maybe not the ITES stuff and a lot of the advanced collision stuff and animation stuff, but add event listeners carry across, and sometimes X and Y properties. A lot of this stuff's pretty useful. So I don't know which class I'm in. I think I'm in the display object. So lots of stuff here, and some of this stuff has pictures, kind of pretty. Take a look at what the different blend modes. It can do a lot of things. Exploration is good. What am I looking for? I don't remember now. Oh, math.random. So if we go down to top level, I think it's a top level. There, it's the math class. These are classes that kind of just exist. straight up, so you don't have to really do anything. You don't have to import anything. String was one of them. Uint, XML, Boolean, classes, date. Some of these things you've already seen before. Some of them you haven't. But if you haven't, explore. Is nan. I've shown you nans before. Traces, numbers trace out as nan by default, not a number. You know, Boolean expressions and whatnot. Yep, a lot of stuff super useful. So if we take a look at the math class, shows us everything about math, and it'll kind of give you some examples of how these things work. It expects you to know how to use them. So if you don't understand how something works, or you want something to be mathematically defined, take a couple trig classes, do a little bit of vector kinematics and in physics, some of that early stuff, and you'll start figuring out how to use these things to your advantage. And there are a lot more advanced things, and you get to learn them as you learn more math. But some things are more useful than others, like sine and cosine, tans, random numbers is probably a pretty powerful one. I don't know if it has. This doesn't have any. Where's random? There it is. Rounding numbers up or down, flooring numbers so that it's locked to, it rounds down, always rounds down. And seal a number always rounds up. So all those are very, very useful in tons of different places. Absolute value, tons of useful things here. So you haven't had a chance to take a look at it, look at it. But this is the function you kind of want to do. And if you go a little Googling, will probably reveal it too. So stage height. And you run it, and it looks like raindrops. Yeah, it's kind of freaky raindrops, but there you go. At some point it'll probably lag, but Flash is pretty performant, so even this, it's just you're not moving all of them, so it's probably fine. Not doing anything strange. Got this working good on you. That is going to be the extent of our tutorial today. Now, what that means is, what are we going to cover next? It's making things modular. This is all very statically defined things. What we really want to do is make this modular so this works with any key that is pressed. If you can try that on your own, definitely go for it. The format for a class is essentially package, class name, main constructor function, same as the class name, and away you go. Do anything you want. I will kind of show you how to make all these things a little bit more object oriented, and hopefully get some more accessing of things in your world. And things that are on the stage, using things that are drawn to your world. This is also very important. There are different ways to access things in your world, and hopefully I'll get a chance to show you how those kind of work.